Hey y'all, Jonathan Lee here with Race Kiki's, and this week's guest is the amazing Sheila Sarem of Project Basta. We will be discussing corporate America, first generation college students, and what it was like for her moving to Texas from Iran at 5 years old. Like and subscribe and drink it all up. So, Sheila,
We're
welcome to
recording.
Race Kiki's. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And as I was sharing with you earlier, this is my kind of casual conversation about race. So I started basically the same way by asking you one question. When did you learn about race?
Hmm. It reminds me of Krista Tippett on Being. She always asks when you realized like what your spiritual upbringing is. So I am first generation American,
Mhm.
and we got to the States when I was 5, and we moved from Iran to Texas.
Oh,
Um, and so I think, and I was sent to kindergarten not knowing any English.
okay.
Um, and so I think conceptually, I was introduced to the concept of being othered or just like othering as early as 4, um,
Hmm.
especially because I had to help my parents navigate everything about moving to America. So that, like, I think is my first experience of race, but not conceptually.
No,
And
I
then
get that.
yeah,
Where did you move in Texas?
to Dallas.
Ugh.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm with you all the way.
Ugh.
Yeah, Dallas in the 80s.
I
So,
spent some time in Texas, both Houston and San Antonio as a younger person, and none of it I remember fondly.
yeah. Yeah, it's a really tough place. I mean, I've now visited like the South, and I recognize there's like a difference between like Texas and like Alabama, but yeah,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
its own sort of flavor of the South.
Yeah, well, I grew up a lot in the South. My family still lives in Mississippi.
Yeah.
So we were raised kind of with the when a white person walks down the sidewalk, you get off the sidewalk.
Mm.
So that was the mentality of Mississippi when I was a child.
Where in Mississippi?
I was born in Natchez, Mississippi, but when we moved back, it was to Jackson when I was 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've spent very little time in that sort of like that part of the country.
If you've been to Alabama, imagine something more oppressive.
Yeah.
That's Mississippi. It feels as if you're going back to around 1950 something. Or at least
Yeah.
I guess I say that having lived in New York for almost a decade. When you
Yeah.
go back, the have-nots feel so much more tangible.
Mm. Yeah, we last summer I got to do a trip with a group of women through sort of a women's organization that I'm involved with. And it's a beautiful organization because it's women from all walks of life, all age ranges, all career
Mhm.
backgrounds. And they took us, and the trip was to Selma and Montgomery. And so we went down and sort of got to sort of got to see the two sites and walk the bridge and went to the memorial, Brian Stevenson's memorial. It's completely escaping my mind. And it was just, um, well, that there's a whole conversation about race when you walk into a space like that. I mean, it was interesting during our visit. The majority of the women I was with were not white, and several of the women I was with identified as Black.
Mhm.
And it's an intense experience to be in this museum, and you're just looking at the history of this country through slavery, lynching, incarceration, and it does not stop. It does not
It
give
does
you a
not
break.
stop.
Have you been?
I have not. I took my partner, who's a white young man. I took him to Jackson, Mississippi 2 years ago for my birthday to meet my family. And Jackson has a
African American museum. And there were two things that we saw that drained all the blood out of his body. In the museum, there are these I'm forgetting a word. Exhibits. I'm sorry. They're exhibits with clear plexiglass and hundreds of names of men and women who had been lynched and the reason why they had been lynched. And when you step up to it, a light comes on over your head and it's saying, "Get out of here, boy. Don't touch that N-word," and it's dropping all of those things. And he walks in and he just gets ghost white.
Yeah.
And he has to go out and sit by himself.
Right.
But I did something on my own. I chose to let him go through that museum with my mother. And I felt like that would have, because my mother, having lived through a bunch of this mess, walking through with this young white fella. I don't want to say he's that young. He's in his 30s. But having him walk through with my mother had something more of a more visceral connection than with me. And
I'm curious to hear from you. So what happened in our experience was that towards the end, and these are women I'd spent days with, and so I felt close to, protective of, like, you know, you just sort of, you know, those trips where you're with a small group of people and you're just bonding. And at the end of the sort of museum, there's a space to just kind of like breathe, you know, like almost cleansing. And a white woman came up and, without asking, while sobbing, like hugged one of the women in our group. And it was so, like, it was like white fragility, just, you know, like in action. And it's like, you know, it's so hard because on the one hand, I think one of the things that's really hard right now is we're not giving people space to learn and grow. And so this woman, this is part of her journey. Hopefully somebody closer to her than, you know, us strangers can be like, next time, don't hug the first Black woman you see when you walk out of something like that. Like, but of course, in that moment, I was just incredibly protective of my friend who had just walked through that experience and then had to hug a stranger, a white stranger who like thought the bonding moment for them. Anyway, so it's interesting that you sent your mom in there with your partner. And I wonder, like, what conversations you and your mom have had or, you know, about just her desire to play the role of caretaker in that moment.
She didn't play caretaker at all. She was my mother is very much like I am, in the regard that we are going to tell you exactly what happened. And I understand that it may affect you, but it doesn't change the history.
Yeah.
And so she was just sharing these things with him. And he says, "Well, Miss Pam, if you'll excuse me." He stepped away. He had his moment, and then he caught up with her. Then he stepped away and he had his moment and he caught up with her. But the other moment is when we went to, there's a place in Natchez, Mississippi called Forks in the Road. It is a monument to where in Natchez, Mississippi, Forks in the Road is where you went to go buy your specialty slaves. It was where it was the Beverly Hills of slave buying. And at this, so at this particular marker, which coincidentally enough, as a child, I lived less than a mile away from. But there are shackles cemented into the ground, like 4 or 5 shackles just cemented into the ground. And I went and I stood on it. My mom stood on it. My older niece stood on it. My partner could not. He could not. Second time I saw him go white. And we spent a lot of our time away from my family unpacking how that felt for him. And he had lots of questions and lots of, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. I can't believe that." I was like, yeah, but yes, you can, because if you unpack the history of our country, of course you can. And when you hear it all out loud, it sounds horrible, because it is.
Yeah.
As a first generation American, how does stepping into that feel?
Mm. It's interesting. I think about this a lot. So I am a brown woman in America,
Mm-hmm.
and the average mildly racist person is not looking at me and going like, you are Iranian, so I'm going to treat you differently than if you were Latina, Guatemalan, let's say. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a different ethnicity. So on its face, I think I walk through this country as a brown woman, and that has all of its own shitty drawbacks. And if you look at, I also think, we have to come together in numbers, because that's the only way to, I think, like, tip the scales of inequality in America. That said, the adversity I have experienced as an Iranian woman is nothing compared to what it means to be a multi-generational Black American. And I think like that is an important distinction. And so I think like person of color, my partner rolls his eyes at that word. I think we need broad umbrella terms because they help us create coalition and fight. And that's what we need. We need numbers to fight. But I think when we're talking about who is impacted and how we should write policy and who should have access to what, I don't think we can talk in broad umbrella terms. And so I think I both like feel like I'm part of the fight and feel like I've expressed some of the oppression. And like, I am not going to be okay until it's not okay until like the most marginalized and the most oppressed are okay. And so sort of holding those two truths in my mind, I don't think is that hard, but I think it's hard for people. Like, how do you both sort of me too, and also recognize like there are degrees of oppression and marginalization. I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but there's sort of like, I think a time for umbrella language and a time for nuanced language. And I try to be thoughtful about when I'm using what.
Well, actually, that makes me think of a question that I did not ask you. When that white woman came up to your Black coworker, your Black friend, what happened after that?
Yeah, none of us were there. And so she shared it after the fact.
Oh,
and
okay.
And she said that she was so shocked. The experience in this sort of museum that Bryan Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative have built is, it's very similar to what you just described, except it's like 2 hours of it nonstop. So if you're human, you're feeling something pretty intense at the end of it. And so she sort of like instinctively hugged this woman back. And then, and then she was sort of stuck in this hug, and she was like really shocked. And I think she came out and she just sort of just immediately shared. I think I don't know why, but she immediately shared. And I think we were all very affirming that experience was incredibly.
I've been in situations before where there have been racist things happening, or actually I can think of a moment where I've confronted a white coworker of mine of her racism, and the same thing happened. There were tears. She started to cry, and then instead of dealing with the racism, everybody's attention shifted to the crying white woman.
Yeah.
i.e. making me, the Black man, the bad guy.
Yeah.
So I was having a conversation earlier, a couple of weeks ago, with a friend of mine about that. It's like, what's up with all the crying? It's like, I appreciate that you don't know how to unpack what you're seeing. And I know that the emotions may be there, but your tears take away from what's actually happening in the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think is the what do you think is the right, not right, because there's no right in all of this, but in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
how do we like shift that is the, like, do we all keep like a copy of White Fragility in our back pockets and like pull it out in those moments? Like,
No, Karen, stop it.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is.
I know that for me, I have usually I've called you on your bullshit.
Yeah.
Because there have been times where the tears happen and I say, we're not doing this. We're both adults here. Mm-hmm. And if you can't use your words without tears, we can't have this conversation, because this isn't going to get you killed, but it may get me killed. Mm-hmm. So I should be the one crying here, not you. So let's calm down.
Yeah.
I think I honestly believe that we as a nation have both, we're so misogynistic in the fact that we want to protect women so much that women, I feel like the reaction to that is, if I cry, I then take the power back.
Mm-hmm. Like, you feel women are conditioned to.
That's how I feel, especially in these situations when we're having things that will make you uncomfortable. If I'm saying something that makes you as a woman uncomfortable, I then have to, as a Black man, I immediately have to stop for fear that your upset will get me killed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a very likely root cause. And at the end of the day, I like just don't even think the root cause matters. It's just like people understanding that.
Yeah. It's like, why are you crying? Doesn't matter. What are you crying about? Because we pointed out something that you were doing that's not perfect. We're not perfect. So fix it and move on.
Yeah.
So, oh my God, I said that. It was not my intention to offend you. How can I do it? How can I correct this and move on from there?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I brought it up and I was just thinking, so I run an organization for first generation college students of color. So they're all like in their early 20s. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they have access to, which is so game changing, is language, And so when they feel something, like I have students call me up and be like, hey, I'm about to start this job and I'm feeling a lot of imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And the fact that there's language to it, like the fact that it's not just a strange feeling I'm having, there's language, and this language is backed by research. And oh my gosh, all these other people feel that too. Mm-hmm. I think allows us to navigate the world better. And we see it all the time. They talk about implicit bias and imposter syndrome. It's just part of their vernacular. And I'm like, wow, I wish I'd known those concepts. My life would feel a lot different today. I probably wouldn't have launched this organization, but I do think this idea of like, I think we have to make the notion of white fragility incredibly common language and common knowledge, so that you don't have to be like, why are you crying right now? But you can literally be like, I think you're experiencing some white fragility right now. And like, you need to go deal with that. But I think language is incredibly powerful. And I'm glad that there's more language that we can all use to like normalize some of the things that we feel and know when we need to deal with ourselves. I feel
that I think that a lot of people refuse to do that because it's going to interfere with what they think about themselves.
Yeah.
So I have this set notion in my head. Well, my parents raised me this way. And my answer to that is, if you're over 25 and you're still living your life the way that your parents raised you, what have you been doing? Why?
You think even now, with just like the slew of murders and lynchings that we saw in the last 6 months, do you think there's more people? I mean, my sense in the work that I do is there are more people who are at least curious, to learn more.
I'm probably 55% on your side about that. Unfortunately, I spend a lot of my time listening to the opposite side. because I'm on this quest to understand why so many very smart people I know believe such dumb things.
Yeah.
And
And
I want to get to the.
I insulate myself entirely from, I'm like, you're either in the middle or all the way left, and I can't really deal with.
I have to. I listen to it and I chuckle because you can't believe this. You can't believe that every vote counts, but stop the vote. You can't, both of these can't still be true at the same time. You can't say one thing and do another. I'm so fed up with the hypocrisy of America that I'm at my wit's end.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I'm finding a lot of people are wanting to go back to their idea of when it was great. But unfortunately, when it was great, it wasn't great for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, leading up to this last election, I have another passport. I renewed that passport. I had serious conversations with my partner about where we would go. I actually made us leave the country the day after the election. Like I was pretty ready for the country to kind of really disappoint me. But while we were gone, one of the things I promised myself I would do in 2016 when Trump first won, and it took me 4 years, but was to really examine our history and read our history more closely. And I read Jill Lepore, These Truths, which is 1,000 pages. And she's a writer for The New Yorker. And she covers everything about history that we don't hear about. So she sort of like glosses over some of the more obvious stuff. And I joke with my partner. I always have said to him, this country's full of book burners and cowboys. And, I think the reality is like, and in the book sort of reinforced this for me, that from its founding, it's been like a few intellectuals and like a bunch of people running away from stuff. You don't leave your country unless you're running away. So this like this sort of fight has been happening. It's as old as the country.
And what I'm finding so interesting about it, because I'm currently reading like 3 different things. Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. Have you read anything by him?
I'm like listening to him he's like on everything these days. So I'm hearing him a lot, but
his How to Be an Anti-Racist, incredible read. It blew my mind when I read it. And Stamped from the Beginning is unpacking the country as it is. And I found, what is her name? Ijeoma Uluo, pronouncing that incorrectly, but she has a book called So You Want to Talk About Race, and a second book called Mediocre that I'm currently in the middle of. Fantastic. And I bring her all up to say that as I'm learning so much about the history of our country, you're right, it's a bunch of intellectuals, but the intellectuals are very, very elite, wealthy people who pit these guys against one another so they don't pay attention to what's going on up here. And then when these people are fighting down here, they're generating income, they're generating this for these guys up here. So the wealthy have always been and will always be wealthy. Keeps these guys fighting against one another. Through every war we've had, through every law we've had, there's a winner and a loser, always. And the winner is always the wealthy, the loser are always the poor people.
Can I, though, not challenge that? So I think class has existed everywhere for all of time.
Oh, yes.
That class sort of dynamic you just described exists in every civilization across time and history, as far as we know. But the racial dynamic that exists in our specific instance of a class system is a bondage system, a system where people are in bondage multi-generationally. Like that
Forever.
that aspect of our class system is shamefully and uniquely ours.
American.
Yeah, and that's like, I think the class system thing is awful and disgusting and horrible and has been around forever, and I don't know what the alternative is. We seemingly haven't figured that out, but the sort of additional aspect of race is so ugly and here uniquely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's my, you know.
I get that. There's absolutely, has always been, there's a book called Cast by Isabel Wilkerson that I'm also kind of reading, but that was so heavy I had to take 2 months away from it. She like tore my soul out. I had to leave her alone for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Obama had that on his reading list this year.
It's so good. It's so hard though. It's such a heavy read.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'm powering through. I have a book a month that I'm committing to digesting.
Just small digression. What do you do? Because I know those books where you're like, I need to read a little bit of this and then I need a palate cleanser. And like, how do you like get through those books?
Honestly, I do it all on audiobook and I do it on audiobook and I do it while working out. So that way, or I'm sewing, or I'll sew something. That way I'm completely paying attention, but my hands are doing something.
Yeah.
I have them all in hard copy, but I can't do that because I think I'm probably OCD. So listening and doing something with my hands is always the better way for me.
Yeah, because those books can be really hard, emotionally, intellectually, like to get through.
Yeah, you have to, I feel like I'm like, okay, I got to go take a dive. I'll see you later, babe. Then I'll take a dive in and I'll come up for air, take the earbuds out and I'll look at him and it'll take me a minute not to be angry at him. It's like, wait, it's not him. Hey, honey.
Yeah.
But it takes, like, the first time when I started doing all of this, and it came about, that was something else you wanted to bring up about when I went down to Asbury for the weekend. We went down because Michael and I had a participate. I'm forgetting every word I'm supposed to be using. We had a collaboration with the Generations Project. It's a organization that records videos and audios and what have you of older gay men, older gay people, and as a storytelling for younger people. And we were telling our origin story, and Michael told about his story of how he overcame his shyness and his wanting to be closed in, to be more open and loving and accepting of community. And it was a beautiful story. I told the story of how I thought I was going to die when I was 45 years old, because I became positive when I was 24. So I thought, I was going to be dead by the time I was 45 because a friend of mine told me I was going to. So what happened when I woke up on my 46th birthday? What was that all about? And it was a really fun story. But as we were down in Asbury, the way I was being treated was, it felt as if I was on display, sort of. Everywhere I went, everybody was staring, and not in that, oh, isn't she cute? But it was what are you doing here? Why are you here? You shouldn't be here. Everywhere we went. And I got into several very uncomfortable conversations with people in regard to the looters and George Floyd, and if he shouldn't have done this and if he shouldn't have done that. And I said, okay, well, and this has been my constant argument. If George Floyd were a white man, would he be dead right now? No, he wouldn't. So it's about race. So why are we even having this conversation?
Yeah.
So why are they burning up their neighborhood? To be quite honest, a lot of things in the Black neighborhood aren't owned by the people who live there, so that money isn't actually staying in the neighborhood. So why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
If you're taking the money out of this failing disaster of a neighborhood, and you've decided, you've designated that we all be here in this one area, you're not putting anything here. There's crime here because there's no jobs here. There's no infrastructure here.
Yeah.
So you then punish people for trying to survive, and then punish them for not.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how you as a white person could sit here and try to justify a man being murdered. I don't understand how you can justify. Well, you're just being, you're pulling the race card. I was like, absolutely, I'm pulling the race card because he was Black.
Yeah.
Well, he was a criminal. So you're telling me that even though he was a criminal, it was the cop's job to execute him? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And after 3 days of that, Michael and Scott and I drove back to the city. And as we're driving back to the city, I was like, well, Michael, we need to talk. Mm-hmm. And we just started having this very open, candid conversation about race, that I wanted to just continue having conversations about race. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because everybody just dances around it. And when you're saying things that make people uncomfortable, the subject is always changed.
Yeah.
And I refuse to change the subject.
Yeah.
Because if we can't talk about it, we can never fix it. We can never get to the root cause. We can never understand, well, if you hear yourself saying that this lovely person isn't worthy of the same things that you have, I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I had a really similar response to, I was just shocked that this looting message sort of took off so much, that people got so riled up about looting. I don't know. I couldn't believe it. It was like ships in the night for me. Like, who cares? Like, yes, people are burning down an Apple store in Soho. Apple's going to be fine. So is Soho.
Be fine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was bizarre to me, people's responses to that. And everybody knows I'm pretty progressive. So my friends who were a little less progressive were like, I'm on board with all this, but the looting, what do you think about the looting? And it was so interesting. And I was like, okay, the way I broke it down for them, because I didn't have patience, was we live in a capitalistic society. Mm-hmm. Money matters more than anything. Mm-hmm. And people do not feel heard. And so, yeah, you break a TD Bank sign, or you crack a window at like a Zara, and all of a sudden people are willing to listen. If that's the only way to get our government to listen, because money turns this country, then that's what people are going to do. And I just couldn't believe that was such a foreign concept. I think the thing that I still cannot wrap my head around, because it just feels so enormous, or because it's so fucking basic that I can't wrap my head around it. You think a cracked window at a Zara store is somehow more important than this man's life? Like, that is the lives of so many. Like, that's the calculus that maybe I'm not willing to step into the lion's mouth and like really think about that myself, because that's crazy to me. And so I'm like, I've been trying to justify it as like, okay, well, Americans are obsessed with property. I've read this history book. We've been obsessed with property since day one. But even if I can wrap my head around the notion, like, guns and property are basically like appendages here in this country, culturally, that still doesn't. Yeah, it's bizarre to me that the looting thing became the sort of anti-movement rallying cry, and actually people think that that's viable. Like, it's ridiculous. What I'm finding is everybody is fine with the races as long as we know our place.
And the minute we start getting out of place, wackiness starts happening. So I understand why you're friends. Well, I don't understand, but I understand why they say, well, I stand by everything, but the looting, what that translates in my head to mean is, well, you know how they are.
Yeah.
You know how they are. Well, Tyrone might be a good one, but he's just an exception. We've been programmed in this country to attach criminality to blackness.
Mm. And so you think it's like, one's here, the rest are coming, like, if one's the nurse. Okay.
Yep.
That makes me go cold inside. And, I think some people I'm incredibly close to have had that response, and I probably haven't wanted to deeply understand it, and instead have gotten really angry with them because it's a really hard thing to acknowledge that, like, a family member, if that's what might be sort of rooting around in the back of their minds, consciously or unconsciously.
No, here's the question about that. Have you asked them why they think that? Because I asked the question why, and most of it is a bunch of nonsense, just a bunch of bullshit, a bunch of pseudoscience from exactly 250 years ago that we're still teaching one another. And the reason why I start my conversations off asking people when they learned about race is what I'm learning is white people never talk about race. And the only time they do talk about race is when someone other than a white person enters their life. And usually they fashion it in a way, even as well-meaning as possible. You may say, well, everybody's the same. However, if everybody in your social circle looks exactly like you, how is everyone the same? Yeah. If everything that you see in your life, every TV show you watch, every movie you go to, every restaurant, you see the positioning, the social capital of who we all are.
Yeah.
In spoken and unspoken ways. So you're being a hypocrite.
Yeah. It's just such a vast country. And that's the thing that I sometimes, I lived in a suburb. I grew up in a suburb. I grew up in 5 suburbs, actually. We moved every year for the first several years we were in America. And so I've been, the lightest skinned colored person in my class. I've been the darkest, I've been like the only brown kid in a class full of white people, the only brown kid in a class full of black people. And I've sort of lived in all of those. I've lived all of those sort of identities. But I think these super white suburban neighborhoods are just so cut off from the rest of, and it's so outside of any reality. But you're right, they see it. If they opened their eyes, they would see it in who's ringing out my food, who's the food runner at the restaurant I go to, they would see it. But it's so like just built and baked into the way they live. I mean, over the holidays, we went up to the Catskills to stay in a cabin. And I mean, Trump towns just full of Trump signs, everywhere you look. And actually, a lot of Trump and Confederate flags, which I'm like, you're practically in Albany. Like, what? You have no connection to the South. What is your Confederate flag doing up in, far north upstate New York? But these, there's so little exposure. And it's interesting, your question to me, do I ask the question? I am very bad at reasonable conversation and remaining curious with folks that have not yet demonstrated or indicated that they have any desire to engage in a constructive conversation. I'm just not that person. I'm not good at it.
Mm-hmm. Does it make you frustrated?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I run a nonprofit that connects first generation college students of color with their first job. I spend every day talking to white people and people in positions of power who are earnestly trying to figure out how to build more inclusive workforces. And so they often say stuff that is like a little bit of a tough to hear. And I can triangulate and navigate and help them see things because they're more eager, they're there to learn. Like I can navigate in the gray with folks that I think are interested in understanding or who acknowledge there's a problem, even if they don't yet understand what the problem is. I mean, we're all understanding. I am not the right person to speak to the people who think everything's fine because I get so angry. Like I don't have like it's never been my strength. But I believe that I'm a radical who has chosen to launch a very pragmatic organization. I'm helping Black and brown kids get jobs in corporate America. That's a pretty pragmatic solution to what I think is a very radical problem, which is how do we transfer wealth and power?
Right. How did it come up? How did you decide to do that?
Yeah. I think, I think moving to America at 5, my first job was in the private sector. I've spent the first 5 or 6 years of my career living and working in Western Europe. I then worked in politics. I then spent 7 years working in HR and recruitment and education. And it was sort of a culmination of my personal and professional experiences that really led me to finally see that the story of getting a job in this country is 2 stories. There's the stories for those who are born into some level of privilege. Their lives are very clearly marked with road signs and networks and, connections. And then there's everybody else. And, I got my first job by printing out my resume truly on thick glossy paper and knocking on doors and had no idea that that was not how other people were getting jobs. And it took, I launched my organization 4 years ago. So I was 12 years, 13 years into my career. And I think I'd finally really recognized sort of the different tiers of what it means to navigate your professional life, and just didn't want another generation to have to go through and experience the levels of self-doubt and unworthiness that I had experienced navigating my career. I wanted them to come into this workforce eyes wide open and with the tools and community to navigate what they were about to experience. And then hopefully along the way, convince some employers that they could also hire differently. They didn't have to make it so hard for folks who are first in their family to, go to college and who didn't look like everyone else at the company they were going to join, to make it so hard for them. So I think I built something for my younger self.
I really wish that something like that existed when I was in corporate America, because it was I'm glad I'm out of it. I'm absolutely so happy. It was, at the time that I did it, I thought it was for me, but it turns out it is not.
Yeah.
It is not.
Yeah.
It is not.
Yeah. I mean, when I had the idea for Basta, I was either going to give in to the belief that I was flawed and wrong and not right for the world of work and the company that I was in, and that something was fundamentally wrong with me. I was either going to give into that thought, or I was going to have to choose to think radically different in that particular moment and realize I'm okay and everything around me is wrong. And that was a scary choice, because on the other side of that choice, you're like, am I a narcissist? Maybe what's wrong with me is I'm an egoist and everyone's fine. And I chose to believe that I was okay. And once I did that, then the idea for Basta came to me. Because that's okay, how many other people were walking around perfectly enough as they are, and what can we do to create a world in which they feel that and experience that? So at the end of the day, that's what Basta's for. It's just the vehicle through that, sort of providing people a place to feel their sense of worth and their value is just through getting a job.
That's fantastic. I'm very, very happy that something like that exists. I'm very happy you exist.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
You come talk to our fellows sometime.
Absolutely. I'd love to talk to people about stuff. I came to the realization that talking about race is something that I just need to do. It's strangely enough, it's the most rewarding thing I've done so far.
And you
Having
and Mikey have done some amazing work together, creating a dialogue around, folks talking about being HIV positive and being connected to the pause community, which I think Mikey really sort of introduced me to. And yeah, that's big, because I feel like that is such a beautiful and worthy thing that the two of you are sort of cultivating and have nurtured together. So that's really,
I love that guy. When I met him, I said to myself, that young man's going to change the world. And I still believe that. Allowing us to grow into whatever it is we're doing. Comfortably Uncomfortable Conversations every other Wednesday. Love for you to join. I would love to have a lady's voice as part of this conversation. It's just an open dialogue about race in America. And we've been talking, strangely enough, a lot about have you heard about the Providence Day School and the kid being expelled for his mother's conversation with the administrator?
No.
Okay. I've talked about it so much, but I go look it up. Providence Day School in Charlotte, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And the young man's name is Jamal. His mother's name is Faith Fox. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying so hard not to get into it again. Every time I talk about it, it makes me so hot. But they're studying August Wilson, the playwright, and one of his plays was called Fences. And Providence Day School is this elite private school in Charlotte, North Carolina. Mom and son are Black. Everyone else in the school, namely in this 14-year-old boy's class, is white. They go to study this play. Mom says, well, I don't think it's appropriate that they're using the N-word all willy-nilly in the class. So the school sends a email saying, oh, blah, 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 we've taken care of this. They send a excerpt from a TED Talk from a Harvard professor about digesting the N-word. This Harvard professor happened to be a Black man. So that's one thing. Mother says, well, that still won't do. They give the son an alternate lesson. So he goes outside of the room while the students inside of all the white kids in the room are studying August Wilson's play Fences in their N-word this, N-word that, so on and so forth. So how does 14-year-old boy feel? He goes home and he says, but mom. Mom says, oh, but no. She sends an email. I can't believe this, blah, blah, blah. They then expel this child because of the email that the mother sent.
That's crazy.
Painting mother as angry Black woman.
Yeah.
Thereby ruining that 14-year-old boy's life. Because we all know that the minute a Black boy gets anything on his record, that is terrible.
Yeah. How did I miss this?
Oh my God, it was such a thing. I think we started talking about this on the 16th. I think that was when that happened. It was been on The View. It's been swirling around.
I've really been under a rock.
It's so juicy.
It is the sort of like, if weaponized appropriately, where social media is incredibly helpful right now. And like, the story in the end is going to hopefully be about this young man and his mother as heroes in this. Mm-hmm. I have to feel positive because it's 6 p.m. and I can't. My hope is that the school apologizes. I mean, how is anyone still using the N-word? Like, in school?
Are you kidding? Cool. Seriously, girl?
God,
no, you know that.
But even in Texas, like 20 years ago, we didn't, I mean, kids used it
Yeah.
and kids sang it
Yeah.
when they were singing music, but it wasn't a word that in school would have been part of the curriculum, like part of any curriculum. But I don't know.
And I'm sure in Mississippi it was.
I mean, I was gonna say full circle back to the beginning of our conversation. I grew up in the South, but now I know there's a South.
There's a South. There's a dirty South.
South. So, man, that's awful. I have to look that up.
Yeah, it's
I mean, I need to pick up some knitting though. I'm gonna like listen to that story and pick up knitting like you do, so that I have somewhere to put my energy.
Yes, because you're like, oh my God, I'm so mad. Ooh, I made a scarf.
Yeah, I would not the exercise part. I'll skip that.
No, exercise is good for you. It's good for you. Get everything. You get all energized, and then the next thing you know, you're feeling better.
Yeah.
Especially if I'm listening to something incredibly stressful, the exercise allows me to channel my anger.
Yeah. I know. It's January 2021. I'm gonna internalize that at some point.
All right. Well, Sheila, thank you very much for this chat. This was fantastic.
Great. It was great. And I wrote down your reading and probably do for another serious read. You know what's a good viewing if you're looking to watch something? We just finished watching Bird, Justin, what's it called? The Good Lord Bird.
Okay.
Which is about my partner's hero, John Brown. Sort of it's highly fictionalized. It's based on the James Michener novel of the. So what? James McBride, not James Michener. And it's about an abolitionist, John Brown, who was a believer that it would take bloody violence to eradicate slavery. And anyway, it's beautiful. It is highly fictionalized, but it's beautiful and stressful.
And if you want to watch something that will make you cry in the most beautiful way, Giving Voice.
What is it?
Giving Voice.
Okay.
It is a documentary on August Wilson, and it's a bunch of students, high school and college students, participating in the August Wilson monologue contest.
Oh, cool. Yes, I love crying in beautiful ways. So that would be
so wonderful. It just had us crying on the couch. It was fantastic.
Yeah, being moved is one of my favorite, my favorite feeling states. So. Pardon? Oh, my partner's upstairs now, so there's a little background. I have an audience. This is great, and I cannot wait till we're all in person again.
Exactly. And when I post these, I will be I'll tag you on Instagram, and a week after I post them on Instagram, the entire call will be on YouTube for everyone's viewing.
Awesome. So you edit. So you edit part. Oh no, you don't. Oh, I thought you meant you edit on the Instagram. Okay, cool.
On Instagram, I cut it down into 10-minute segments, but I choose never to edit the video because much like a conversation, you can't edit that either.
Yeah. I'm down. Great. All right.
Have an amazing night.
You too.
Be well.
We connect on at this level. It's been
all
fun.
right. Me too. This was wonderful.
All right. Bye.
Bye.